Hi everybody, welcome to the first episode of DFFOO Academy. I'm Type Zoe, and this series I'll be taking an in-depth look at one aspect of the game, be it mechanics, upcoming content, character analysis, or really whatever I can think of. My plan right now is to loosely base these videos around the 2-week Synergy BT unit of the cycle, starting with Eldnarsh of course, but I don't really know where this series is going to go in the future, so let me know if you think that's a good idea, as well as any other criticisms or improvement you can think of. It's been really fun putting this video together, and while my editing skills are not the greatest, I've just had so much fun learning how to piece things together and add music and my voice clips and making the slides for the presentation. It's just been a really cool experience, and I hope to be doing a lot more of these in the future. Lots of great players really helped me out when I was beginning to the game, and you'll even see some of their footage in this video later on, and I just want to spread the love a little bit with this series and try and help out some people who might not be as experienced with Lufenias yet. So without further ado, I think that's all we have to cover. Let's get into today's episode of DFFOO Academy, Team Building Tactics. And don't forget to like and subscribe the channel, forgot that part. Now that Kurosame has established dominance over the class, let's begin today's lessons. There are a few topics under the umbrella of team building I wanted to explore in this episode, and the concept of how to team build for Lufenias has been something of a hot topic in the community recently. There's sometimes new players will be struggling to really picture what they want to do before a fight starts, and I wanted to break down what I believe are some healthy ways to try and approach endgame content. I've separated those into what I call the two major schools, those being level-based team building and character-based team building. For our section on level or fight-based team building, whatever you want to call it, we'll be using the Transcendence Tier 1 Reckoning Lufenia as an example for analysis. I've gathered some gameplay footage from some really cool players, Arole, Belial, and Snoopball, and they all showcase some different approaches you can take to conquer the same battle. We'll be doing that to explore underrated ways to get around mechanics, how to avoid only using synergy, and more. For our other character-focused side of the team building, we'll be looking at the 2-week cycle unit, Mr. Nacho himself, who this video will be dropping probably about an hour before his cycle ends, but better late than never. That covers the overview, so let's get into the pros and cons of our two different schools. As previously stated, we are working with our two categories to break down the core concepts, level-based and unit-based team building. Of these two, for general-purpose content clearing, I find level-based to be far more reliable, and it's more likely to give you the quickest wins. No matter if you're going in blind or researching beforehand, you'll learn the fight mechanics, potential orb triggers, pick how your team will handle them, and just head straight in. Synergy and burst characters can often give you breathing room or more building options if you're using them. One thing I will say is that if you're working purely from an efficiency standpoint, it can become monotonous to approach fights the same way. For example, Terra and Yang, two very strong characters, have been prevalent in the last month and a half in the meta, but most of us would be bored running them exclusively. On the other side of the equation, building around specific units can let you use your favorite characters or playstyles more often. You decide what type of team you're bringing, blab out who you want to show off, and then try and find fights they can clear. I'll use Ferris as an example in the recent past, someone with great utility but who can often be hard to slot in the main party. Let's say you bring her to the Chaos Bahamut Lufenia. She has a potent defense down debuff and can dispel on the Eldnarsh mannequin to supplement your team's damage output. However, looking closer, the bosses were immune to Elemental and Peril, hindering her own personal DPS. A way you'd compensate for that was by bringing Bart's Aura and Peril on his burst effects to give her some much needed weakness damage. The main issue with building around one unit in a vacuum is you need to adapt the team to the Lufenia's mechanics, and this can sometimes be a frustrating process. Now, there's more nuance to this than completely separating both of these ideas, but these categories will let us explore the ideas individually so you can put them together yourselves. Prepping for the fight will often be more reliable, but experimentation drives creativity in the meta, and I find that looking for unappreciated character usage or niche kit synergy can be lots of fun. Starting off with level-based team building, there's a couple ways I like to look at each fight. Although they are all unique and will require different things, these two categories really help me think about what to do for a fight and how much I need to stretch my thinking muscles, so to speak. Those two categories being intensive fights and relaxed fights. Intensive fights I like to think of as ones that force you to think as the bosses move and their health lowers. That can be anything from HP threshold mechanics, it can be if they have different attacks they do, if their recasts change, and Our examples I've chosen are Transcendence Tier 1, which will be our further analysis in the gameplay footage section, and Divine Alexander. So these two fights are not similar in the roles you need for them, but they are similar in that, in my opinion, there's lots of moving pieces, you need to build pretty restrictively, there's so much to cover for each fight. And we'll look at Divine Alexander to sort of go into what that entails, since Transcendence Tier 1 does get a further breakdown. Alex wanted us to bring dark elemental damage, it wanted us to bring strong shavers, and it wanted us to pay attention to the turns we were taking, what number of recasts the boss had used, and it also had sap auras, attacks that punished you if your whole party wasn't at full health, debuffs, just so many nasty things. Comparing that to, say, the upcoming Lael 6-man event, where the Lufenia literally just needs a launcher and nothing else, you can see why it's nice to break them like this. I will say, Edward's Lost Chapter is here as an example to show that just because a fight doesn't have a ton of mechanics does not mean it can't be difficult. With that being said, let's explore Transcendence Tier 1 as a way to figure out how to team build for an intensive fight. So Transcendence Tier 1 was one of the most restrictive fights we've had in quite a while, and I think it would be a great idea for an example fight to see how different players can approach the same fight. There were 3 main required roles for the party, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. I've simplified the concepts just so it's easier to categorize them. You wanted launchers for the Wave 2 flame wheels, you wanted gravity or instant break for the Wave 1 effects, and you wanted damage and mitigation for, well, both waves really, but primarily Wave 2. All of these units were used at least 8 times on the Call to Arms except for X-Death, so they were pretty much the cream of the crop character picks for this fight. We're going to highlight 3 of these units, being Paladin Cecil, Kais, and Gabranth, for being the banners units who directly preceded the burst cycle of Transcendence 1. These characters were showing up more than almost everybody else in the Call to Arms, and they were considered the absolute must-pulls of their era because of how difficult Tier 1 was. So we are going to look at 3 players who didn't have Paladin Cecil's burst and only used at most one of these in their party to clear the fight. Our first gameplay we're going to look at is from the lovely Erelay, co-host of the TCC podcast and one of my favorite players to watch personally. She brings a lot of lesser-used characters to her fights, and overall just super knowledgeable, very sweet and helpful, and I just really like her content. Ironically, she's actually bringing the most standard team of the 3 games we're going to be looking at, but it's still a great showcase for Arciella specifically, a character I love and is my most used character in Lufenias to date. She is bringing her with Ramza and Kais of the big 3 we mentioned, and Arciella's big goal here is for HP and silence. With Ramza and Kais both doubling up on the instant break and launcher roles, Arciella was free to act as the team's damage mitigation entirely by herself. Her HP Silence is such a powerful tool, it can completely negate the need for shaving, it can protect from recast potentially, and she also gets to bring some backup healing and some Brave Regeneration with her fast cast ability. Though she didn't have Paladin Cecil's overhealing or defense boost, or even Gabranth's attack down, Arrow was able to get through this fight with debuff lockdown entirely on Arciella's back. Kefka would be another alternative at the time of this fight's release. It just goes to show how powerful boss denial strategies can really be, especially when you support them properly as Ramza and Kais are here through their launch damage carrying Arciella's average output. Let's move on to the next clip. Our next runner is one of DFFOO's resident big brains, I would say, Belial himself, a orchestrator of many very interesting strategies, most notably the iBrave Mbrave down teams, where he sets the boss's iBrave or Mbrave stat to 0, which unbreaks them every other turn. You can check out more of his videos in the description below, as well as Arrow's, forgot to mention hers. But going back to the fight, Belial has brought one of the most interesting teams that popped out to me when I was looking at the Call to Arms. He is using Edward as his choice for gravity, and Paladin Cecil for damage mitigation without the burst. This leaves him with the choice of Ultimisha for his damage per turn. Funnily enough, Ultimisha and Edward are both also key figures in his iBrave Mbrave Down saga, but he's just using him here for their regular kits. Edward's LD Lullaby sets the enemy Brave to 0, which is functionally the same thing as Instant Break, as long as your attack isn't absorbed, any attack, even one that hits 1s for the Brave damage, will Instant Break the following turn. Or rather, it will break them, excuse me. If you remembered our 3 key roles we went over before the Transcendence Fight gameplay, the thing that Belial's team is missing is launchers. So he will be using his call slots as dedicated launch options in order to push the flame wheels past their HP thresholds and cut their regen off. However, Edward at the time of this fight did not have his call 70, which forced Belial to get pretty creative to get his 3rd set of launches. He uses the Pandemonium summon despite not having a launcher in the main party because of the increased chase units it deals during the summon. You'll see him toying with them a little bit with his Ultimisha in order to fix up that launch right as they go past the 50% mark. This shows just how creative team building around a fight can get you past mechanics you might otherwise struggle with. Shout out to Belial for a super creative run, and let's take a look at our final submission of the day. Our last showcased player is going to be SnoopBallPH, a very underrated YouTuber in my opinion, so show him some love. He does a lot of cool runs similar to Arrow in that he'll bring some lesser seen, non-synergy strategies, all that good stuff. Of the clips in this video, SnoopBall is the only one not to use anybody in our big 3, opting for a team of Ramza, Vincent, and Kryl. Kryl is, as I've said in this channel many times before, one of my absolute favorite Final Fantasy characters, both in the series and in DFFOO, so love to see her showing her muscles. And Vincent was a controversial character in the community, to put it lightly. I was actually not around and hadn't begun playing the game yet, but he really shows off what a properly supported Vincent can do in this fight. Compared to Arrow, who was bringing both Ramza and Kais for the launch and instant break roles, SnoopBall is only bringing Ramza, so while he does compress the roles, allowing him to use 2 different members for 1 key role, it does mean that he has to space out Ramza's LDs very carefully for the launches, as well as just be careful since he's the only source of healing on the team. That's why he opted for the Alexander summon, because the HP poison of the flame wheels can totally mess up your ability to freeze the orb and keep yourself safe from the flame wheel's very dangerous attacks. Vincent's attack down debuff is the primary way he plans to deal with them, but he also has a Camelnut call on Kryl instead of his burst user, because he really needs Camelnut for the attack down instead of the refund effect in this case. And with SnoopBall's segment done, I'd like to give a big thanks to all 3 of the players who so graciously shared their footage with me and let me show off some different ways to approach a fight. The next segment won't be so long, so thanks for staying with us, and let's move into part 2. So Eldritch has one of the more divisive kits in the game, I'd say. He's objectively quite powerful, but he's not the easiest character to just pick up at first glance and have immediate success with. He does need some support on the team building side, because he has a lot of warp turns, which is his primary way of keeping up with damage, in addition to his completely amazing boss lockdown with Terror debuff. This isn't going to be an extended guide into how to play Eldritch because there are both better players with him and better resources out there for that. I believe Jin Lee broke him down quite well in a longer video on his channel along with some fight analysis, so make sure to check that one out if you need some help. But we are mostly here to see how to team build with Eldritch and what are some kind of roles that he either appreciates or can bring to the party. This also is going to allow me to talk about some of the other units in his cycle, including Iroha, Strago, and Ash, so let's jump into the chart and see what we got. It seems my favorite thing to do is break very complex topics up into 2 easy-to-digest categories, both because I am an idiot and because I think it's a little bit easier to learn this way rather than having to sit through hours of monologues or super long text posts, so hopefully you can bear with me this last time as I show you how Eldritch can appreciate both lockdown abusers and battery-related characters to help his kit. Let's start on the lockdown abuser side of things and show you how people like Tifa and Squall can be great Eldritch partners, although they don't look it at first glance. The thing you want to look about with Lockdown is it doesn't give the boss any chance to apply its mechanics. That means characters who don't bring much party utility other than their personal damage are free to work unimpeded, and it lets them carry Ildnarsh's damage so that he can focus more on his longevity and his boss lockdown rather than having to worry about his skill management as much. He'll be more free to just use his HP++, manage his cooldowns, that sort of thing. We also can reverse that knowledge because for shorter fights, Ildnarsh is not going to have to be as liberal with saving his skills, and having higher damage per turn team members allows him to keep up with them and just really spam skills almost every warp turn. A video I want to shout out is Some Girl's Extreme TCC Challenge run of Edward Lost Chapter, where she partnered Ildnarsh with Golbez to great effect, and he really just went ham and had a huge damage per turn average compared to his normal fight, and that's something you can keep in the back of your pocket for any time there's a shorter fight you want to bring him in. Rounding out the side with our damage dealers, I've chosen a few different supports, all who perform their roles in different ways to show that there's quite a few options you can take when you approach team building like this. To start it off, Varus seems like a very odd partner for Ildnarsh at first, and this is mostly enabled by Tifa's personal ridiculous damage. But because Tifa is so strong, she can make up for Varus's poor damage output, and just let Varus's debuffs go to work with her extra defense down, bringing up, I believe the party defense down total would be something absolutely ridiculous like 160% with both Ildnarsh and Varus in the party, as well as Varus cutting all the brave gains of the bosses to let Tifa shave better, or not even deal with shaving at all really. So that's an interesting way to bring a character without good damage into a party. I've chosen Ashe as the universal support, so to speak, for both branches of this side because Ashe just released recently. She has an amazing kit with turn manipulation, EX recharge, with Ildnarsh particularly really appreciates. She enchants just in case Tifa wasn't hitting hard enough for you, and she also brings a backup HP regen just in case something goes wrong with your terror debuff. Birds ends up as our final half of the Lockdown Abuser side, and he really could work for honestly any of the teams with Tifa as well, but limited space on the metaphorical piece of paper, so I'm just putting him in Squall's team, and mostly to show that Ildnarsh loves Bartz's burst effect because the battery at the end of turns after you deal your HP damage just makes sure that Ildnarsh caps pretty much every turn for free on his HP++s and even his skills too. And Bartz is also an enchanter, so that will definitely help Squall and Eld, who aren't quite as strong as Tifa and will need a little bit more support. To finish off the video, let's see how the various battery-related characters I've chosen help Ildnarsh to support him rather than seeing Ildnarsh support the party. When you're using characters like Iroha and Sarah, Ildnarsh is going to see a massive increase in his potential damage. I've included an extra little bracket between the two because the three of them do form an effective team that we've seen in this cycle. Iroha's discounts help with both his multiple hit skills like his LD and also his warp turns. If he keeps his battery, then he's going to just keep doing more damage over time. Ildnarsh isn't what comes to mind as a multi-dump character that Iroha typically works well with, but the way I think about it is that his warp turns functionally act as a multi-dump attack. They're just spread out over time. And since he's acting in between enemy turns so often, it can be a little bit before your party has another chance to either use a battery skill or anything else, so Iroha functions pretty much like she does with other multi-dump characters. Sarah, on the other hand, has probably the most obvious synergy in this entire flowchart with Ildnarsh. Her Embrave regen is absolutely fucking ginormous, and his turns are so constant that he's going to keep popping that regen over and over again, and with Sarah's massive Embrave and her own personal battery on her turns and her debuffs not being as conflicting with the new 8 debuff slot count on the fights, she becomes pretty much the perfect partner for any Ildnarsh team you could ever want, so Sarah is definitely a character to look out for. I'm going to go pretty rapid fire for the DPS on this side as they're all functioning in different ways, but using Iroha and Sarah's battery effects to some extent in order to increase their power. So we've got Golbez, who is the king of multi-dumps, and in my opinion, probably the most consistent Iroha partner we'll have, other than maybe Ashe if you're considering her personal performance. We're going to have Strago as our double hitter here because he can appreciate both kinds of effects since he's only 2 dumps, but it's a constant 2 dumps every turn, so they're both going to be helping him out. And then I've got Trey, who also can work with Iroha, but I think works better on a Sarah team because her auras are better, and Trey does need a decent amount of auras to hit his peak, so that's who I've chosen to support the battery side with. In conclusion, there's so many ways to approach team building, and it can be easy that it's frustrating when you don't beat a Lufenia for the first day, the first week even, and nothing you seem to do is working. What's important is to keep a clear mind, know that there's just so many resources out there to help you. There are so many people willing to help you as well in various servers, including I'll give a shout out to TCC as a place that helped me when I didn't even know how to beat Entropy Tier 10. So there's just lots of places for people who want to give some help, they want to be kind, and they want to grow the community. And it's just nice to be able to be a part of that on the giving side now. So thank you so much for watching again. Please like and subscribe if you want to see more videos in the future of this series. And yeah, that's about all I got. Bye, Anara!